Hello and welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me, Tom Sherrington, and my great partner, Emma Turner. Hello, Emma.
Hi, Tom. Are you well?
Yeah, I'm well, back in action and excited to talk to Jenny, who is our great guest this evening. Welcome to Jenny Webb. Welcome to our podcast.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Now, you're someone who I've seen you do a research ed, which was in Leicester, actually.
Yeah, that was nice.
Oh, my hometown.
Yes,
yeah,
it was fantastic, and I've also heard you do a masterclass for our masterclass series before, which is amazing. And you're just someone who, like, pretty much, I don't know how many years now, but you're one of these people who just fills a space of Twitter, blogging, sharing in this incredibly dynamic way. And sometimes it's hard to keep track on everything you're doing. And on your Twitter header, you've got all these books you've written: How to Teach English Literature, Teach Like a Writer, and the book that I've got in my hand here, the Metacognition Handbook, which is a brilliant book for all teachers. So, just what in your head, what do you think? What is your kind of focus? Because there's so many things it seems to be doing. What are you kind of working on at the moment?
So I'm really lucky to have just finished a book with Marcello Giovanelli, who, for people who aren't English teachers, is a proper rock star in the English teacher world, because he writes all the A-level textbooks and things with a couple of other people, and he's just an incredibly clever bloke. He's a professor of stylistics, which is basically the fancy name for applying grammar to literature analysis. So, and that is super geeky. He's a specialist in the war poets. So he likes to talk about how grammar kind of affects the way meaning moves through a line of Siegfried Sassoon and that kind of thing. Like, he's a very, very cool guy. So he approached me 2 years ago, actually, and asked me to write with him. And it's just been such an amazing journey. It's been so interesting. So yeah, we've just finished that, and it's kind of been a really, really interesting experience, because what it's meant is that, because grammar was never, ever, ever my strength, and I went to a pretty kind of, I'll say, a really rough state school in East Leeds, and then went to read English at Oxford, where everybody else at my college had gone to a really fancy private school. So I was at one of the oldest colleges, and so there were lots of there were two Etonians and someone who'd been to Harrow, and two girls who had been to private girls' schools in Kent, and there were boarders and all that kind of thing. And they were lovely people, but it was a very, very different experience, because I ended up being a medievalist as a linguist, and it meant that I had to learn grammar really fast. I didn't have a grounding in proper English grammar at all, and I kind of just worked my way through it. And so writing this book with Marcello has essentially meant kind of learning, or at least confirming for myself, lots of the things that I've self-taught well enough to really, really absorb all of what he talks about. And then kind of, he's done all the, grammar, and I've done lots of, this is how it applies in the English classroom, English curriculum. And it's been such a joy to work on. It's really, I've learned so much doing it. I feel like my brain's been put through a vice. But yeah, it's been
That's so amazing. It's funny because there's a few little personal things which just you'd maybe think of there, because I know, because I looked in your book, the blurb everyone has, and you went to Merton in Oxford.
Yeah.
And that is where my grandfather, my mum's dad, was a don.
Really? Very fancy.
He was a don of classics. So yeah, he and that. So every time I see Merton, I just feel like, oh, my grandpa was there.
It's a really, I know it sounds like, I sound like such a rah. I grew up in Chapeltown, single parent family, so I'm not rah at all. But it's a really interesting kind of, my husband grew up really, really close to me. We've been together since we were 16, and we both applied to the same college, both got in. So both kind of kids from Leeds, both went to the same college. And then we were both choral scholars, and and then we got married 2 weeks after finals, in the college chapel. It was a bit of a fairy tale, really, but kind of, I don't know, a lot of people have had really negative experiences going there, from kind of having no roots in that kind of environment at all. And actually, I think going together was amazing, because, we had this kind of kind of support network, which was awesome. But the college was lush. Like, they were just so good, and they were so supportive for like poor kids. They gave me so much free stuff. You know, they sent me to Iceland on research. They did all sorts of
the supermarket.
No. No, they don't. That's so funny. Yeah, they took me to
Iceland.
I mean, yeah, they gave me a research grant, and they sent me off to Iceland to look at manuscripts because I was really into Vikings. It was very cool. Yeah, they're amazing.
Wow.
You're a medievalist, so to sort of, you know,
Yeah.
so what does that mean? I mean, there's like, you know, Beowulf plus. I mean, what's your sort of?
So
can you
out
recite
of
us a bit of Old English then?
So I couldn't, because it was like, what, however many, 16 years ago or something. Slightly, I'm a tiny bit rusty, and it is a dead language, still a dead language. But I did like 2 papers in Old Norse, 3 papers in Anglo-Saxon, 2 papers in Middle English. So yeah, it was very cool, like really cool stuff.
Very cool.
Jenny, I want somebody to make a film of your life. I want to make this into the great romance of the century.
I'm not dead yet.
It's the most beautiful story. I was sitting there going, oh, that's so lovely. I like it.
It's gorgeous, isn't it? It's really brilliant. Something else
we are quite in a sickening.
I want to tell you about is my stepdad, Larry. He is 91. And he is about to publish. Literally, he got his manuscript back from the publisher yesterday just to prove. He's written a book. He is a medieval Latinist. So he's written a book about a medieval poem by a 12th century monk, and he's critiquing this poem or sort of talking about it. And he's written a whole book about this poem, and it's coming out like any time soon.
Very cool. That's amazing. That's so cool.
And I can't wait for it to come out. It's 91. It's amazing. So look,
Jenny, you need to host him on your online CPD and do a unit.
I mean, it's a tiny bit niche.
I mean, Jenny and Larry would be amazing.
Yeah, you should get together. Anyway, look, let's dive in a little bit, because I feel like, I mean, so you're obviously an English specialist, but because of our audience, you know, there's a lot of people. We're kind of a generalist podcast here, so I'm going to focus on some of the kind of lots of things around the metacognition in a way, because I guess people can draw more from that. But having said that, the most recent thing I've read of yours was your most recent blog post. And it's just a really amazing kind of dissection of how to write. So it sort of embodies the metacognition through this sort of spatial metaphor of writing. And I want to just share this piece of writing that you analyze, because I just think it's fantastic. So you write this sentence. I'm going to read it out, okay? Because to me, it's sort of there. So look at these 2 sentences. Blake's attack on the great institutions of British power is simultaneously furious and devastating. Not only does he convey a powerful sense of anger, every cry of every man, but he also highlights the lived reality of the most vulnerable in society through reference to infants, child labour of chimney sweepers, and the stark lives of young unmarried mothers. And you sort of think, when you read that, you think, how is any student ever going to be able to write like that? And then you break it down. It's just absolutely magnificent the way you deconstruct that amazing writing.
Do you know what I think? Sorry, go on. I didn't know a question.
Tell us about that. I mean, just explore that for us. What's happening here?
So I think what's really interesting for me is that writing is an immensely complex set of processes. And in order for someone to write, they have to be able to kind of hold lots and lots of different kind of areas of knowledge all at the same time. It's like spinning plates. So they have to be able to think about like the actual thing they are trying to say. But then in order to uphold that thing they're trying to say, they also have to be able to kind of have all the words and the structures and the punctuation and the kind of, but then also the sort of, what do I put first and what do I put next? Because the positioning of the thing in the sentence is going to kind of determine where the stress is. And I actually want to say something that's more complicated than just one thing. I want to say 2 things at a time, or I want to say 3 things at a time. Or I want to hold these 2 things in balance or in opposition with each other. And kind of, depending on what you're trying to say, there are 100,000 different choices. And I think that what's important is that we as a result of that, sometimes, and I've certainly been guilty of this in my career, what we often do is we say, right, here are some sentence starters, and then all you have to do is fill in the blanks. And that is a way of getting stuff down. It's a way of getting them to write something. But what it is not doing is enabling them to create from scratch. It's not enabling them to just say, right, I've got all these tools in my toolbox and I can just decide how to do this. Because the only way that a child can truly express what they actually think about anything is for them to be in control from start to finish, right? And so what I want to do, rather than saying, okay, every child has to start a sentence with a fronted adverbial. I love a fronted adverbial, love it. But I will use it when it's my choice, not because my teacher has said you must start with a fronted adverbial. And there's nothing wrong with doing that as practice. You should totally practice like that. And you should try and make them do lots of interesting things all the time so they can just try their skills. That's great. But what's important is that they understand what their choices are, but then what effect those choices can have on their writing and what possibilities those choices open up. So in those two sentences you just read out, the first one uses the phrase simultaneously, which enables a student, if a student says, in my subject, they would say, the writer does these two things or these three things simultaneously. By introducing the word simultaneously, they're able to immediately hold up two different ideas at once. And they're saying it's not as simple as, you know, just one thing. I could just describe Blake as powerful or dynamic or furious, but instead I'm going to describe him as two things at once. And then I've set myself up to be able to talk about both of those things. So for a student to know that if I use the word simultaneous, I'm immediately going to be more complicated and more sophisticated and interesting, basically. The other interesting thing for me is that, like, teaching structures, I think there's a really bizarre political debate that goes on in the kind of English Twitter that I really try very hard to stay out of and very rarely get involved in. Every now and then I can't help myself, but then I have to like rein it back in because I'm not angry or confrontational, but I am very opinionated. It's really important that you know, when we say things like subordinating conjunctions, lots of grammar terms have really scary sounding names, but really what's interesting is the function that those things kind of provide. So a subordinating conjunction just subordinates one bit of a sentence to another bit of a sentence. So it's saying this bit is part of a sentence, but this bit is probably more important, right? This bit's been subordinated to it. So when you say not only, but also, that's a pair of phrases which introduce ideas which are where one is subordinate to the other. And it's a really, really enabling structure. So lots of people think that you just shouldn't teach them because it's just fanciness for fanciness' sake. Why would you bother with grammar? It's just confusing people. Why can't you just let them be creative? And my view is, if you just say to students, right, I'm just going to let you be creative. I'm not going to trouble your little tiny brains with all these big words. You can just say what you want. They will just paint in the many shades of blue that they've got in their head. But if they're trying to paint a sunset, they need red and they need orange and they need yellow and they need purple and they need all these other shades. They don't just need blue. And that's really important. Like, I honestly believe that if we don't give them lots and lots of interesting things, then they never say interesting things, or at least they never say things that's their voice, you know, coming across. Yeah. And in that blog, essentially, it's about using pictures and using a kind of a visual map of how the sentence works and how the bits of the sentence affect each other. And in my classroom, essentially what I try to do a lot is give students, right, here's an interesting sentence. How does it work? Let's break it down. And now can we move bits around and can we swap things in and out? You know, I've got a really interesting year 10 group this year who are absolutely gorgeous. They're there's some really kind of underconfident writers in there, some very, very underconfident writers. And today I did, just as a mini whiteboard activity, I had, what was the sentence? It was something like, Mr. Burling is obviously, it is obvious that Mr. Burling is something, right? Really, really simple sentence. But I was using a modal adverb, right? So, that was it. Mr. Burling is obviously a figure of ridicule. That was the sentence. Now, what I said to students was, right, look, because we'd done modal adverbs for a week, and I said, right, is that a modal adverb? Yes, it is. Brilliant. Why is it a modal adverb? And we talked about modal adverbs and we talked about swapping in different modal adverbs. He's possibly a figure of ridicule. He's this, he's this, he's this. That's a feature of the sentence that when we map it, they can see that what it does is the thing after it it becomes more or less likely depending on which modal adverb we use. And they know that that's the function. But then what they did was we swapped it out and we took out the modal adverb and we took out the character and we took out the final statement. So it became character name is modal adverb, a figure of something. And we swapped it in and out and we went, Mrs. Burling. And they had to go, Mrs. Burling is clearly a figure of, I don't know, like derision or something. And they basically had to like rewrite it, but it was the same structure. And all they had to do was think about, right, what choice can I make here? What choice can I make here? What impact does that have on the
makes it all accessible, doesn't it? It means it's sort of within reach. That's what's so clever about it. You're laying the path. I mean, we had a discussion, didn't we, Emma, but recently about grammar with one of our little head-to-heads about the structure.
Yeah, I heard that. It's interesting.
Oh God, is that interesting? As in, what on earth are you talking about?
No, not at all. No, but I think I agreed with what you were saying, Emma, and I think it's everything in moderation and just teaching the names of stuff and labeling things and not being kind of, I mean, forgive me if I'm misrepresenting what you were saying, but there's a kind of, there are massive challenges with the way grammar is taught, and there are challenges with the way it has to be taught at primary. And I have massive respect for our primary colleagues. You know, we did a baseline with all of our year sevens just to figure out who remembers their grammar from year six and who doesn't, so we can plug our gap. We use that. We know what our primaries have taught, and we then build on it and make sure the meaning is all there. But, you know, the number of kids in my class, in my year seven group, who are delightful, who just smashed it out of the park. They knew every single thing that they needed to know. They could tell me what a determiner was. They could tell me what a pronoun was. They could give me an example, and they were brilliant. And that is a testament to their primary teachers who 2 months ago taught them that stuff. Or that was the last time they did it, but actually they probably hadn't done it intensively since SATS prep, and that's amazing. The teaching's been brilliant, and but the way it's tested at SATS doesn't necessarily help grammar in the long run, but the way it's being taught can be helped by secondary later on.
It's interesting because I was still teaching in year six when they first introduced the grammar papers, and the shift in the focus from teaching, moving away from the structure of a text to actually the nuts and bolts of the grammar, and the emphasis on that was so different. And it's interesting to hear that that's kind of filtering through now into secondary. But it was a very rude awakening for a lot of year six teachers.
Yeah.
Like you said earlier, I was never taught grammar. A lot of teachers had never taught any aspect of grammar, and then suddenly having to find out what a subordinating conjunction was and an adverbial extended or an extended noun phrase. We were like, what?
You're right, though. And the issue we have really is that, you know, Marcello talks about it in our book. He's really interested in this. There has not been any formal grammar instruction in English state schools, or the majority of them, unless they're a bit rogue and they decided to do it anyway, for about 60 years. And most English teachers did not have formal grammar teaching in their own schooling, and probably had an English teacher who didn't have formal grammar teaching in their own schooling. And so it is a very, very, very rare thing to find an English teacher in secondary who really knows their grammar really well and is confident. And generally it's because they've taught A-level language. You know, I've got some utterly brilliant colleagues in my school who are very, 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 very strong English teachers who over the last year basically kind of had a bit of a grammar 101 with me, and we were teaching things for the first time, and it's been really it's been brilliant, and it's really increased their confidence in terms of how they teach writing. But actually it's shocking, like it's our language, and there's so much. I'm not a fan of being a snob about it. Like I always say, like, grammar doesn't judge you, snobs judge you. Like grammar's just a system for describing stuff. It's not judging you in any way. Like there's no such thing.
Because you can see teachers are working so hard to integrate the stuff, and I've observed it most, so I suppose, the run from year 3 up to year 6, where you have you've got to introduce the concept, and then you have this sort of very artificial sort of notion that words which you're not entirely fluent with, but they've got category names like subordinating conjunction, and then you're sort of encouraged to include a range of things, and it's on a list. And teachers will try to produce scaffolds which they think are helpful, like here's a list of subordinating conjunctions. It's sort of, very quickly for some kids, they've just it's so inorganic. They've just lost that sense of fluent. Just what do I want to say? Like,
yes.
It's so structured. They don't even know what they want to say anymore. It's
yeah. How do you blend that's the point. Well, I think the key really is that you start with meaning. So I would always start if my students were writing something. Well, whenever my students are writing anything at length, that we always start with meaning first. So we don't start with grammar because that's madness. Really, when you write anything in English, it is an art, right? You are creating something and you have to start with the intention first. So if a student is writing, let's say an essay, or in fact, let's start with something slightly more, helpful. So like a piece of transactional writing. So like a letter, they're going to write a letter. Before they do anything with grammar and structures and fancy vocabulary, they're going to map out what they actually want to say in the letter in very, very plain language. So this is the overall point I want to make. This is the person I'm writing to. These are the arguments that I need to kind of bring up in this letter. These are the examples that I might use. So essentially, there's like a skeleton first. I might then also get them to write kind of the opening and the closing just in their own writing, sort of like stream of consciousness. Don't over worry about kind of anything else yet, because it's really, really important, I think, with any type of writing for them to kind of get their thoughts into play. Because as you probably know from working with Oliver Cavaglioli, like that there's a real kind of the process of writing itself is generative. And so often you don't know what you're trying to say until you've written it down, because when it's up here, you don't tend to interrogate it because you can't, like you can't like look at the things that are in your working memory and kind of make sense of them just in a cloud. So that sort of writing something down, even just in note form, is really generative, because essentially you're able to sort of interrogate what you think and reframe it until it's phrased in the right way, until it's phrased in the way that captures exactly what you're trying to say. That's really, really important. And trying to explain that to students, you don't need to write something and it be perfect first time. Obviously, that is very challenging when it comes to exam prep, because exam writing is so incredibly contrived and it has no correlation to real world writing at all, which is very distressing. Spend a long time, trying to get it right in a way that
question, because you sort of for me this operates at a number of levels. So there's a kind of just intellectual interest, which is like, you could geek out on stuff, and there's like some of your blogs are so interesting, just sort of deconstructing a process. But then there's also the kind of sharing of and through the blogger world, getting stuff out, and there's that, and writing books. But then I'm really interested in a school, like when you're working with actual teachers that and you're trying to get the ideas from this sort of theoretical state into practice. What do you find works? I mean, are all your colleagues all like sort of really hot on this because you talk about it all the time, or have you had to work on it?
I think they're probably just exhausted by me most of the time. So it's interesting. I'm assistant head for teaching and learning and research lead at my current school, and I was assistant head teaching and learning at my previous school. Very, 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 very different schools. We at Cathedral, it's a very kind of it's a brilliant. I mean, it's a school that serves a big council estate in Wakefield. So, old mining town, lots of challenges that come with that. But really phenomenal organisation, where when it comes to things like staff CPD and working with teachers and helping them to kind of come to these really, really challenging content sessions, but then take something meaningful out of it for their own practice, it really is not a chore, because they are brilliant and they're working in an environment where they feel motivated and valued and they see the point. I'm not working in a school where people look at SLT and think, well, you're a bit rubbish, and because I've worked in environments like that before and it's been really challenging, and people are jaded, and rightly so, actually, in some situations. Whereas at this school, it's just a completely different culture, and it was like that when I came, so it's certainly not me who's created that, but there's, it's a really lovely environment, and essentially the culture is such that when you come and bring something new that feels very different, people are just up for it. I've been into our maths team and trained them on literacy stuff in maths, and they've just been so up for it. There's no convincing, there's no issue, you know, sitting down having a conversation with the head of science about how to create a language rich environment in a science classroom in order to support EAL, new to English kids, like, and she's just so fascinated by all the things I'm telling her and so keen to get it right. You know, there is just such a willingness to try and to apply all of our, you know, principles and kind of values as a school. It's just a lovely place to work. And that sounds really unhelpful to anybody else. Because I have the joy of working at my school. I'm sorry. But I think in general, kind of successful CPD, when it comes to these kinds of things, needs to involve, it's about little and often. So Tom, I think you heard me and Anna Gillinder speaking at Research Ed, and Anna is my senior VP. She's absolutely incredible. She's just the best person I've ever worked for or with. It never feels like you're working for her at all. But she and I kind of work really hard to make sure that when we do deliver CPD and we want to change something, we think very, very hard about how much we're asking them to understand and implement at a time. And so we very much have a drip feeding model. So this year, for instance, we've already got a situation where staff totally understand how we learn. They understand the model, they understand working memory, long-term memory, they understand retrieval practice and all of that stuff. And now we're moving into a much, much deeper look at kind of the memory model and kind of thinking about building schema over time, like this forest that keeps growing and keeps regenerating itself. And that's a whole new area of cognitive science that they are kind of starting a journey on. The plan by the end of the year is that they all have a really, really fluent understanding of things like variation theory, but not just in maths, everywhere, right? And a really, really good understanding of kind of generative learning, which we sort of started last year, but we're kind of bringing in more. But then we've got priorities to drive through that. We want to look at oracy and pushing metacognitive feedback and writing and all sorts of things. But we have planned it, so it's going to be drip, 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 drip all year.
So you're not like you're just going to fry everyone with the overload there.
Exactly. We're starting with this one thing. So we showed them Efrat First's model, her memory model, which is just such a beautiful visual. Started with that, and that is all so far. And we're just
the triangles one.
It's little hexagons.
Build it like yeah. No.
So the answer is to work in a really great school with really great people.
It's really, okay. Having said that, like, so in my previous school, the staff were brilliant, like genuinely brilliant. And there were huge challenges. It was a really, really, really challenging environment, really challenging cohort for a number of reasons. Massive proportion of asylum seekers and refugees and all of the challenges that come with dealing with children who are experiencing lots of trauma, like really, really, really challenging environment. Challenging for a number of reasons in terms of leadership, blah, blah, blah. But when it came to CPD, what was always really meaningful was making sure we led with, these are our kids, this is what we're doing, and this is why, and it being really, really practical. So it was always, we're going to try and achieve one thing out of this session, and we're going to discuss it, we're going to practice it, we're going to try and apply it in lots of different situations. Then you're going to go off and have a go. And then for the next few weeks, I'm going to come in as many times as I can, and I'm going to give as much feedback as possible. And then we're going to go again with the next thing. And I think that just keeping it practical all the time and less of the theory, more of the stuff, less thinking, more doing, is my kind of...
It's a really supportive model. And you're such a generous educator of your students and also, you know, your staff that you work with. And one of the things that fascinates me about your website that is about this kind of ongoing learning and constantly supporting each other was your reading list project.
Yeah, can I take 10 seconds because my 2-year-old is suddenly screaming and decided he wanted his dressing gown. Can I just 10 seconds?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, it was I kind of have these sort of mad ideas and then immediately follow through with them because I have ADHD and I can't not. So and this was before I got medicated for that. So it was really intense. So essentially the reading, sorry, that was really unnecessary level of detail that.
It's a whole long story there.
I can't help myself. I'm just a sharer. So the reading list project is essentially a bit of a way of solving a perennial problem for English teachers, which seems to be that we want to teach the good books, but nobody knows what the good books are because no one has time to read books, right? So what we want to be able to do is know every single book that's ever been written, but people keep writing more books. And so it's impossible to keep up. There are lots of incredible people who know loads of things about books that are being written for children or young adult fiction or whatever that might be appropriate. But there are so many different factors that come into selecting texts to teach at Key Stage 3 that it is really important to be able to find advice somewhere. The other really important thing is that at Key Stage 4, our options are so incredibly limited because of, politics that I won't go into. Everyone knows my feelings about that. Well, I say everyone. English teachers do. Don't need to repeat those. But I am on record about my feelings about the spec. But what we need to do, therefore, is fill Key Stage 3 with very, very, very high quality texts, which are also really good options that genuinely open kids' horizons. So the Reading List project is essentially a collaborative effort. I've got loads and loads and loads and loads of English teachers who have basically suggested books for Key Stage 3. They've put things on there like kind of why they would recommend the book, a little bit of a summary, but also sort of trigger warnings and things like that are really important because, if you teach in a certain cohort or context, there are certain things you don't really want to be reading a book about. And it's an opportunity, hopefully, for people to be able to go and find some options that narrow down the options so they can read some things and maybe find a good book to teach Year 8 is the idea. I think it's really important to be incredibly explicit and open about diversity in curriculum choices for reading. It's really important to be able to click a filter and choose non-white authors without feeling like you're being, kind of woke or whatever nonsensical concepts people come up with. But it is important, and there's nothing wrong with saying, we haven't got a book by a brown woman on our curriculum anywhere, so maybe we should have one of those. That's a powerful choice to make, and I think it's the right one. But it's important to have tools that enable you to make those choices. So essentially what people can do is, if anyone's listening and wants to, if they just go to my website, in the menu, the Reading List project, you can submit a form that just puts the details in straight away of a book that you've read, and it will automatically populate a page which I will then just approve, and it'll go live. And it's just a nice, it's growing all the time, and it's just a really nice resource, and I know people use it, so it's good. Yeah.
Oh, Tom,
you're on mute.
Oh, amateur hour. Yeah, so I was trying to avoid. Again, everyone has noises off, don't they? I had the background here. I've done a lot of work with schools, curriculum reviews, and I'm not a specialist. So you go and you're trying to be advised. You're being presented this English curriculum, thinking, guys, come on, like, where have you been? Like, you're making it too hard. Just do the work. It's a totally, classic curriculum, and they just agonizing, or should we drop this or should we do that? And you're not even trying. You're not even getting out of your little space. And here you've got this list. I mean, just looking at the names, and most of these books I've never read. I just want to get started. Tiffin, The Tiffin by Mahtab Nashiman, Black Enough by Ibi Zaboy, Poor by Khaled Fehmi. I've never read these books, and I want to read them. It's like showing you a world that you're not exposing yourself to straight off. I think it's amazing to have teachers doing that.
Yeah, and that people are so generous with their time. They're kind of, teachers are really keen to. English teachers particularly love recommending books. Like, it's a thing that we do. We're born with it, and I think it's a really joyous thing. And what's really important is that books are always going to be a very subjective decision. There are so many you could choose, and there are so many, like, the number of requests I get on Twitter through DMs as well as just in the open for what book should I teach Year 8? And I'm like, well, who knows? What's the point of the book? What's the unit? What's it coming on from, and what's it going to? And I think that in English in particular, sorry for people who are listening to this and this is completely unhelpful for them, but in English in particular, one of our biggest challenges as a subject is understanding where curriculum is a massive journey where we have to sort of take them to a point where they are ready for independent analysis of very difficult texts. Where that kind of fits with this idea that I'm going to choose this book because I like this book. And actually, I like the book is not a good enough reason to teach it. The kids like the book, not a good enough reason to teach it when you're teaching English literature at secondary level. It's not a good enough reason. It's a good enough reason to read it, like for fun and to recommend it and to support them with that, but absolutely not a good enough reason to have it on the curriculum. And so if you've got something on the curriculum, there needs to be a very, very, very sensible kind of logical thought through reason for it. And it needs to be based in the language, you know, what is in that text that's going to carry our curriculum during that period. You know, they're a vehicle. And then the next thing you start takes on that weight and keeps moving with it. And that's how it has to be looked at. You know, there are books on my curriculum. I say my curriculum, our curriculum, which is collaboratively planned and owned. And I'm not even the head of English. There are books on our curriculum, which are not my favorite books. I don't think they're the best books in the world, but they are absolutely a very, very, very good choice for that thing we want to teach at that point. You know, it does all the things we need it to do. And that's what's important. It's about loving books.
I was going to say, is it a bit like developing a reading palette? Like if as a toddler, you only want to eat plain pasta and bread, and actually you've got to start introducing different tastes, different textures so that they actually are ready that more sophisticated, like literary palette.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, it is. It's partly about exposure to lots and lots of different things, but it's also partly about kind of so you know, if you're teaching some like kind of threshold concepts for English, like what is metaphor, what is, you know, rhetoric, what is tension, right? Some really, really key concepts, which you can teach in year 7. How do we increase the complexity and depth of those ideas over a number of different units where they're just going to keep growing and keep appreciating new levels? Where are we going to find the new depths? Because if we've just taught rhetoric in Animal Farm, where are we going to find the new depths? Because it is brilliant, but there are so many further kind of things that we could plunge into. And one of them is Julius Caesar by Shakespeare, right? You can look at rhetoric in that text the year after, and suddenly they're just going to a whole new level of brilliance. And it's about that. It's not about kind of, we should read this book because so-and-so wrote it, or we should read that because it's in the cupboard or whatever. It has to be about, or, you know, the one that really kind of doesn't irritate me, because I understand where people are coming from, but it's the kind of, we're reading this because our kids identify with this character. Brilliant. That's fab. I really think that's important, but you need to find a literary reason as well. It's not just about story, and story is so important. I sound really heartless, but there is a difference between reading for reading's sake and the academic study of English. You know, we don't just make things go by chemistry because it's fun. We study chemistry, and it's the same in English.
It's interesting though, because I feel like, you know, a lot of these curriculum conversations, I mean, literally every single curriculum masterclasses event that I've run, in the questions over the 2 days, at least one person will say, they'll be expressed this feeling of being absolutely like overwhelmed by how much the people speaking know. And they're going, oh my God, but how do you get to know all the stuff you know? Because if all my teachers, if I knew what you knew, I'd be laughing. But it's that kind of gradual accumulation. And I feel like with text selection, you know, basing on some of the schools I've spoken to, having a guide through what's there, at least to sort of signpost possibilities without it feeling like this endless choice, is actually quite helpful. So when people have recommended sort of, like you're trying to do with this, there's a bit of depth. You want to say here, look at this book. You say this book, notable reasons for recommending this book. It's a powerful exploration of grief and an excellent introduction to the verse novel form, whatever. You think you're helping people sort of. Yeah. It's a way. And do you have a sort of a recommended set which you would ever even dare to say, this is I believe in this set of books?
No, I don't. And honestly, I look at a lot of English curriculums. I do it quite a lot. And it's, you know, I looked at one last week, and it's impossible. You know, it's that kind of context is king thing. And that sounds like a really dreadful get out, but I honestly think there's no such thing as a bad text. it's about the right text for the right reason at the right time. You know, we teach a text in year 7 at the moment, which I absolutely loathe, but only because I would never ever choose to read it. I just think it's dreadful. But the reason it's there is because of what we want to do alongside it. And it makes complete sense for those reasons. And I won't go into it, it's a little bit political, but it's one of those sort of, we want it to carry this and this and this and this and this, and it can. And it does it really well. And it creates a level of confidence and fluency, and then it propels us into the next thing. And so it's the right vehicle. It's not necessarily the best book. And we have to be a little bit less emotional, I think, as English teachers when we make those choices. And I think there are so many other places to squeeze the good reading in as well, you know, that I don't know, it's a really, really difficult one. It's so hard because it's the curse of sort of, there is so much to read and people won't stop writing new books. You know, every year there's another Jalak Prize, there's a new kind of Carnegie list, there's a new, and they're all new and they're all phenomenal. And you have to be able to just hone it in a little bit. I mean, there are some texts I would absolutely say are dreadful that you should never have on any curriculum ever. And I'll have that argument forever. But that again is one of those things that kind of, you know, and, you know, I will happily kind of put my kind of boy in striped pajamas has absolutely no place on any curriculum.
Oh, wow. I was talking about that with the school last week.
Yeah, it's absolutely dreadful. And, you know, when an oppressed group come out and say, please stop teaching this book in schools, you just need to sit up and listen and stop being so arrogant, I think. And so does John Boyne needs to just stop. He just needs to stop. But there are lots of, you know, I once saw a school that will remain nameless that had some David Walliams books at secondary on their curriculum. And David Walliams in general can get in the sea, but the book on an actual curriculum makes me feel a little bit sick in my mouth. But, you know, there are some, I'm starting to rant about books now, and I said I wouldn't do it.
I mean, it's funny because I wasn't sure we'd be getting into this, but this is all great. I mean, Emma, do you find primary teachers are as kind of...
Yeah, I'm with you, Jenny, on one of those authors mentioned they were on the banned list at my school. I don't mean banned as in I wouldn't let them on the premises, but I wouldn't spend all money on buying them. You know, if you wanted to read, bring them in from home, enjoy being a reader and immerse in it. But there were books on our primary English curriculum, and I just thought they don't deserve their place on there. You know, we could pick any book in the entire world, basically at primary, because we're not beholden to exam syllabus or anything like that. You know, we literally have the world at our feet in terms of picking books, and we're just doing children such a disservice if we don't pick books which are both at primary interesting, captivating, and rich as well in terms of getting them ready to read challenging things. We got a little visitor.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, how about that? This is cool.
He'll just sit. He'll be fine.
It's almost like the first thing is sort of to decide you're going to agree. You know, like I remember going to an English department meeting, where the first item on the agenda was, are we going to teach the same books? Because there's no point even arguing about which ones they were until they kind of had all signed up to the principle of shared planning and a collective approach.
Yeah, and that's the challenge. And, you know, I see lots of like multi-academy trusts. One of the biggest challenges that English departments have in multi-academy trusts where they have a shared curriculum is that someone in another school, for the right reasons for them, has chosen the books, and then the other schools are having to use them. And it's such a challenge. Like, where very mercifully working for an executive head who doesn't do that. Like, he wants us to be aligned so we can support each other, but if we can't be, we just break apart, but we still support each other in different ways, and that's great. But that, you know, book choice is such a personal decision, personal to your cohort, your department, your school. And actually, while I think it's really important to do it for kind of the right kind of sensible reasons, I also think it's important to do it in a kind of, you know, I feel quite strongly that reading a book with a class is a bit of a spiritual experience for me. Like that's really important. I think I often get accused of being a little bit too cold and like kind of cog sci and, you know, English don't mix, and you're being a bit too, you know, knowledge rich for this subject. But actually, I think you can do all of that, but also have absolute heart and kind of soul in your teaching.
Well, if you got the thing started to finish this conversation with, I mean, the passion of the text selection linked with the sort of forensic grammar stuff. I mean, it's all part of the same world, isn't it?
Yes.
Obviously, this is an interesting. I mean, I'd love to discuss this more, but this thing of like teachers being the kind of the neutral kind of facilitators of learning and not trying to bring too much in them and the curriculum speaking for itself. I actually feel like it's asking too much of humans as teachers to do
it.
Like,
yeah.
Of course, you bring your passion to it. You sort of, how can you not?
I mean, I finished an inspector calls with year 10 today, and it was emotional. You know, the line that Eric kind of has towards the end where he says to his own mother, you killed her, you killed her, you killed my child, you killed your own grandchild. And it is just, it literally gives me like goosebumps at the back of my neck. How can I not be a teacher who is espousing political ideas when that text is on the curriculum? It's such a nonsense. I mean, I know it's different in different subjects, and it's far less relevant to talk about issues and your feelings, but I can't teach that text well and not show my emotion and not show part of myself and be neutral, because that's absolutely mad. Like that, it's impossible, and I would never want to do that. And I had a really interesting chat recently with Hailey Hughes. Actually, we had dinner, we live quite close to each other. She's amazing, but we were talking about this, and you know, we're both kind of raging lefties, but obviously are in the classroom as we are as neutral and professional as we possibly can be. But how on earth the Conservative Party expect you to be neutral but put things like Dickens and Priestley and Willie Russell on the spec? Like, it's all very strange. It's like they haven't read those books.
Well, maybe they have.
Jenny, I've got one reading recommendation question. What does an English expert read their 2-year-old at night? What was the bedtime story?
That's a really, really good question. So Henry is he's obsessed with have you seen the Story Orchestra books? Give me 3 seconds.
There we go.
I'd like to bring it back down to EYFS, Tom. We've had lots of.
No, definitely. I mean, incredible. Like to
We've got loads of these, and they're lovely. This is the Nutcracker, but we've got them for like the Carnival of the Animals and stuff. So because their dad is a professional musician and he's a trumpet player, but he like directs choral societies and stuff, they've got all these really lovely musical books. So the boys love to read. My 6-year-old is an avid reader. He's obsessed. But Henry loves books, and we read the Nutcracker this evening because he's obsessed with it, and he likes to press the button for the Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairies and then do little pirouettes mostly.
I love this. We've spanned the entire reading recommendation gamut from age 2 to 18. I absolutely love it.
It's fantastic. You know, those books are the ones that stick with you. I mean, my kids have just left. I mean, my daughter moves into her own flat at the weekend, and my son's away.
Wow.
And, we've got we're clearing stuff out, but they're the books that we read them when they were kids. We just can't get rid of them. They're just too precious. They have this special place in your family folklore.
Oh, they're amazing. We're very I'm obsessed with books. They're just it's bizarre. I'm normally in my study, and I decided not to be in there because it's next to his room, and I thought I'd wake him up or whatever. And so I would have had loads of books behind me. I feel like I'm like, you guys look very learned.
It's amazing, honestly. Yeah, it's so amazing talking to you. We can just go for so many different tangents. It's just so full of knowledge and energy, enthusiasm. It's absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much for coming on our podcast. It's been a real joy.
Oh, it's been a joy, and thank you for the guest appearance from, was it Henry? Did you say?
Yeah.
The very first child on the podcast. So thank you, Henry.
So we'll have to wrap it up there. So listen, thanks to Jenny, thanks to everyone listening, and go and check out Funky Pedagogy on Twitter, and then you'll go to all Jenny's blogs and books. Amazing output, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you for joining us on Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe. Goodbye from me.
Oh, thanks so much, Jenny. Thank you for joining us.
Goodbye,
Thank you for having me.
Bye, everyone.